to support culturally relevant and responsive intercultural understanding in FSL. Tip 1. Establish a shared understanding of culture. Before engaging students in learning about Francophone culture, we must first reflect on the term culture. We often define culture as a set of traditions, characteristics, and social conventions shared by a group of people. When we were students, we likely saw our own culture in terms of things like the traditional foods, music, and clothing associated with our country of origin or ethnicity. Today, we know that culture means far more than that. Culture is about ways of knowing and being. We belong to multifaceted and complex social groups that inform and shape our lived experiences and impact how we experience our multiple cultures. To teach intercultural understanding in a meaningful way, we need to acknowledge this truth about culture, share it with our students, and ensure this understanding informs how we teach about Francophone culture. Tip 2. Communicate that there is cultural diversity within French-speaking communities. As with all cultures, what it means to be French-speaking is not a single thing. Baguettes, berets, and poutine might be iconic symbols that people associate with Francophone culture, but this is primarily due to our Eurocentric privileging of those ideas over others. We need to remember that French-speaking communities span the globe, and what it means to be Francophone means different things to different people. To ignore the cultural diversity within Francophone communities further perpetuates colonialism on all French-speaking people around the world. Our curriculum emphasizes this important truth when it asks us to teach our students about a particular French-speaking geographic region every year to ensure we are highlighting Francophone diversity. Highlighting the distinct cultural differences between French-speaking nations is essential, but not enough. Diversity does not begin and end at geographic borders. We must also teach that cultural diversity exists within French-speaking communities. For example, when exploring Quebecois culture with our students, our first instinct might be to focus on historical aspects of white settler colonialism, such as the Chateau Frontenac or Quebecois folklore. Instead of dwelling uncritically in the past, we need to amplify and affirm the contributions of identities that have been historically marginalized in our curriculum, such as those of our Black Haitian Quebecois people. When teaching our students about any French geographic region, we must ensure that our definition of Francophone culture does not begin and end with the dominant culture. Tip 3. Value linguistic diversity in French. Our curriculum asks us to support students in learning about how different French-speaking communities communicate with one another through the study of sociolinguistic conventions. It encourages us to introduce our students to various French expressions, accents, and pronunciations from Canada and la francophonie mondiale. In doing this, our curriculum presents us with the opportunity to dismantle the white supremacist idea of proper French and to, instead, embrace all the different ways in which the language has and continues to shift, change, adapt, and thrive. In other words, it asks us to acknowledge that there is not one French language, but many. Understanding this and sharing it with our students will support us in establishing a positive FSL environment, one that focuses on emerging confidence in using French to communicate rather than achieving perfection. Valuing linguistic diversity in French also pushes us to think critically about how the French we learned might not necessarily represent all the language has or will have to offer. For example, though we may not have been made aware of gender-neutral pronouns such as yel and lo, that should not prevent us from learning about them and teaching our students how to use them. Embracing linguistic diversity will help us ensure that we acknowledge an ever-evolving French language that lives beyond the Français standard. Tip 4. Critically choose authentic and representative texts. To avoid painting Francophone culture and the French language as homogeneous and static, we need to critically reflect on our text and resource collections. Remember, each text we bring into our classroom space communicates explicit and implicit messages about what it means to belong to a French-speaking community. The music that our students listen to, the stories they read, and the videos they view all work together to help them define Francophone culture. To ensure that these definitions reflect the diversity of French-speaking communities, we need to choose texts that represent the intersectional social identities and lived experiences of Canadian and global Francophone communities. We also need to invite our students to critically analyze these texts and support them in identifying the values they communicate. Providing our students with language supports, such as dictionaries, sentence starters, visuals, and translation tools, and explicitly teaching them the critical vocabulary needed to engage in these conversations is crucial. When placing the spotlight on a particular geographic region or nation, we also need to choose texts that support our students in making connections between that community, other French-speaking communities, and their own communities to support them in deepening their intercultural understanding. Every year is a new opportunity to explore and critically reflect on the diversity existing within and between French cultures. Tip 5. Create space for students to make personal and community connections. A vital goal of the intercultural understanding expectation is to support our students in seeing themselves as members of the global French-speaking community. To do this, we need to place our students at the center of all learning. As Dr. Rudine Sims-Bishop tells us, we need to provide windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors to our students so that they see themselves in the learning. To action this, consider collectively defining identity with students and prompting them to reflect on all of the different social groups they belong to, including French language learners, before asking them to research a Francophone culture. Also consider having students create an inquiry question to drive their research to ensure they are able to learn about an aspect of Francophone culture that resonates with them. Language and culture are inextricably linked. By using a culturally relevant and responsive approach to gain intercultural understanding, we can create new spaces for each learner to feel affirmed in our French language classrooms.